بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah. All praise is due to Allah, and may peace and blessings be on the last messenger of Allah. Assalamu Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And welcome back for part 3 of our 4-part series, How to Be Unapologetically Muslim and Live Your Best Life. I want to thank IAGD once again for inviting me to teach this series on this very important topic. So last week, we talked about the inward aspects of being unapologetically Muslim and living your best life. This week, we're going to pivot and we're going to start talking about the outward aspects. What I mean by that is, how do we communicate effectively about Islam with others? This week is going to focus specifically on how do we communicate with people outside of our faith. And then next week will be, how do we talk about Islam with other Muslims? And so today, what I want to do is, I'm going to start off with the 10 biggest mistakes that Muslims often make when talking to others about Islam. Now, these are not in a particular order, but these are things that I've observed in my own experience, and I've heard from other Muslims from their experiences as well, that these are some of the biggest challenges, some of the biggest mistakes that we often make. So the first one is allowing the other person to shame us for being Muslim. The second one is going on offense by becoming harsh. So that's kind of the opposite of the first one. Number 3 is launching directly into the answer. So you get asked a question and you immediately launch into an answer. Number 4 is doing a brain dump. This means telling the person everything you know about that topic. Number 5 is looking unhappy and uncomfortable, like you're stressed having this conversation with this person. Another one, number 6, is getting distracted. This can be in your overall presence, but it can also be in what you're saying. So an example of that would be just randomly bouncing around from one topic to another. Number 7 is trying to prove the other person wrong. So feeling like that's your objective in the conversation is to make the other person wrong. Number 8 is needing them to agree with you. So having that be an objective is that you have to convince the other person. Otherwise, it's a failed conversation. Number 9, conceding defeat or otherwise ending abruptly. So this is when you get stuck, you don't know how to respond to something, and so you basically just tell the other person that, well, yeah, maybe you're right and I'm wrong. Or some way of basically ending the conversation abruptly. And then the last one is not knowing when to walk away. So these are 10 things. These are 10 very common mistakes that Muslims often make. So now what I want to do is back up a little bit and give you kind of an overarching view of what specifically we're talking about here and what is the end goal that we want to have in these conversations. And then I'll go back through those 10 things and tell you what you want to do instead. So to give you just kind of to anchor us in, what is the exact type of conversation we're talking about. So we're not talking about preparing you to do a formal, presentation or to do public speaking or to sit on a panel or have a debate with someone. The tips and the strategies that I'm going to share with you today are for those casual encounters, those everyday interactions that you might have. So for example, you run into someone in the checkout counter at Meijer and they ask you about your hijab. You are sitting next to another mom or dad at your kid's soccer game and they ask you a question about something they've heard about Islam or something they, heard about Muslims. Another example could be a coworker. You're out for coffee or lunch with a coworker and something comes up and you have this, this brief interaction. You're sitting next to someone in class and they ask you something, or you guys are studying a unit on Islam. And so, people notice that there's a Muslim in the class and they kind of want to talk to you about some things. So, again, this is not preparing you to be an expert or a public speaker, because you need advanced training for that, obviously. But this is for those casual, everyday interactions that we have with our fellow Americans, where we feel like we're unprepared, even when it's a simple question. And this, to tell you kind of where this fits in our four-part series, this is the fourth C. If you've been with us for the other two sessions, you know that what I teach is the 5 C's of personal growth for Muslims. This is the fourth C, which is communicate effectively. And the reason why it's a part of this overarching system of personal growth for Muslims is because I believe that, as Muslims in America today, we really need this skill. This is a fundamental skill that none of us can be without, which is, how do we have these everyday conversations? So the end goal that we want to achieve when we go into a conversation with someone about Islam or Muslims is, I'm going to summarize it with 4 things. We want to be likable and respected. It's important for us to demonstrate warmth. So we don't want to be cold and indifferent, but we're also not looking for the other person to feel sorry for us. We want to be respected. That's important. The other thing that we have as an end goal when we enter into these kind of conversations is that it's not about winning or proving that you're right. And you might say, well, wait, don't I want to, leave the person with a positive impression, or don't I want to, be able to convince them somehow? Not exactly. So we're going to talk about that. The next one is that the goal is you want to have an open exchange of ideas. So it's not so much about proving that you're right or they're wrong, but this is an opportunity for you to have a constructive dialogue. Doesn't matter if the other person is convinced or not at the end. It doesn't matter, who wins or doesn't win. It's about opening the door and, having a good conversation with your fellow American. And of course, the last one, which is obvious, but, you might say, well, we don't even need to say that, but I do want to say it because sometimes we forget in the heat of the conversation. And that is that we only want to use accurate information. So we never want to make things up just to try to, get through the conversation, or to, try to win an argument or whatever. So we want to stick to only what we actually know. Okay, so again, the end goal is being likable and respected, not making it about winning or proving yourself right or the other person wrong. You want to have an open exchange of ideas and use only accurate information and never make things up. Okay, so we said that, we started with the 10 mistakes that we often make. So what's the solution to those things, and what do we want to do instead? So number 1 was allowing the other person to shame us, to make us feel apologetic for being Muslim. And the second one was becoming harsh, going on offense. And so instead of those two, what we want to do is we want to be confident and nice. So you want to be polite. You want to have impeccable manners. You don't want to let the other person walk all over you. So you're trying to strike that balance. You don't want to be like saccharine sweet or be a people pleaser. You want to hold your own and have integrity and self-respect. But at the same time, having a degree of warmth and likability is also important. And those two are not mutually exclusive, right? They can be balanced together. Another way of thinking about that is that you don't want to treat the other person like they're better than you, but you also don't want to act like you're better than anyone else. You want to be on an equal footing with the person that you're talking to. The next thing is that you want to turn and face the person. So your body language is very important. Before you even say a single word, how you carry yourself and the presence that you have, your physical presence, plays a really big role in how that person is ultimately going to see you. And so you don't want to have, be kind of turning and sort of halfway looking at them. You also don't want to have your shoulders hunched or to be in a, sort of like a submissive or insecure kind of a posture. You want to sit up straight and tall, and you want to have your shoulders facing the person that you're talking to. You want to you want to show them that you're giving them your full and undivided attention, and that you are fully present for this conversation with them. And one thing I want to mention as I'm going through these is that, when I've taught this topic before, what people will often say is, this is something I can even use in my daily life, not just in conversations specifically about Islam. And I think, you might find that too. So again, you want to be confident, but also nice. You want to turn and face the person. The next one is that you want to have an open stance. And this kind of goes along with, you don't want to be hunched over, but you want to have an open sort of presence with the person. Eye contact is also important. So one thing about American culture is that people tend to trust others when they look at them, rather than looking down or looking away. I had a sister once ask me, well, I'm not comfortable, where I live, I'm not comfortable, in my culture for me to look directly at a brother, when I'm talking to him. So I tend to kind of look down or away. I said, well, in that case, if that's how you feel, obviously different cultures have different norms for what's considered like just normal friendly interaction versus what would be considered something outside of just a friendly interaction. So obviously you're going to, follow the norms of that. But also, if you feel like you can't comfortably have a conversation with, someone from the opposite gender, then you probably want to focus more of your outreach type of conversations with other women instead. So you want to be in situations where you feel comfortable and relaxed. That's important when you're having these conversations. So turning and facing the person, having an open stance, good eye contact. And by good eye contact, obviously, I don't mean like staring the person down, but you're not looking here and there. You're maintaining a fairly good, steady eye contact with that person. Again, this conveys your confidence in what you're saying before you've even opened your mouth. And it also conveys that you're giving this person your full and undivided attention, which is really important. Shows respect, and it sets a good stage for the conversation that's to come. The next one, kind of obvious, but you want to smile, okay? It doesn't have to be fake. You don't have to plaster a smile on your face the whole time. But, you want to, in between, you want to have a friendly expression on your face, whatever feels natural to you. But what you don't want to be is, you don't want to look stern the entire time, or tense or uptight or uncomfortable, right? So you want to have a friendly, relaxed facial expression. And along with that, you want them to feel not just that you're okay talking to them, but you're actually enjoying this conversation. Like you want to be here. You want to be talking about your faith, about Muslims. This is something that you care about and you enjoy talking about. Okay, so that's everything about how you sort of set up the conversation before you even say anything. And again, it has everything to do with your overall posture and your stance, your eye contact, and also your tone of voice is another one too. So you don't want to have a very soft, whispered kind of a voice where you're really shy and timid and it sounds like you're not really sure about what you're saying. But you also don't want to sound angry and combative and that sort of thing. So you want to have a nice even tone, when you're talking to the other person. A good way to sort of, before I move on to the next part, which is the opening, how do you start the conversation? A good way to think about your presence, which is what we've been talking about, is it's kind of like if you have an iPhone, if you want to change the brightness, you sort of swipe up and then you have the brightness setting and you can just move it all the way up to the highest brightness. So kind of do that with yourself, like intentionally, deliberately decide that you're going to show up as bright as you can, right? So just turn up the brightness on your own personal presence as you're having this conversation. Okay, so now you are there, you're, sitting or standing in front of each other, and now you're about to start the conversation. So it could be that the other person initiated, they've already asked you a question, and now you're about to respond. And that's kind of the example we'll take, but it could even be where you're initiating it. But I'm going to go with the person has approached you and they've asked you a question. So the first thing that you want to say when someone asks you a question is that you want to thank them for the question. Now, you might say, well, why is that important? Um, it does a couple of things. First of all, it again establishes that friendly and confident tone for this conversation. You're not shying away. You're also not rushing right into it. You're taking your time and you're thanking them. Because to be honest, it takes a little bit of courage for the other person also to come up to you and ask the question. So something along the lines of, thank you for your question. Thank you for asking me that. Or that's a great question. I'd be happy to answer that for you. So these are some examples of ways that you can start the conversation. The other advantage of doing this rather than launching directly into your answer is that it gives you a moment to form your answer in your mind, rather than just immediately feeling like the spotlight is on and now you have to quickly think of something to say. So it just gives you that one little brief moment to establish a nice connection with that person and to give you just that one split second to think a little bit about what you're going to say. Now, so that's the positioning, the presence, and the opening. That's what we've covered so far. So the next thing that I'm going to talk about, this is where we get into the middle of that sandwich, right? Like you've got the bun, the outer bun, the bottom bun, and then you've got the middle, the meat and the veggies and the condiments and all of that. So now we're getting to the middle of the conversation. And there's a couple of things that I want to share with you here. The first thing is that you want to keep your answers accurate. We said that at the top, but brief. You don't want to go on and on and on and do a brain dump where you're trying to remember everything you know about that topic. I see people do this a lot, and I know that the intention is good. You want to make sure that you've completely and thoroughly answered the person's question. So there's a good intention behind that. But what people don't realize is that the other person, when they hear that, it's kind of overwhelming. It's overwhelming, and it also kind of just seems like an avalanche, which can come off a number of ways. One way is that it can make the other person think that you are a little bit insecure, and that's why you're just telling them so much, like you have some kind of doubt about this topic, and so you're just talking, talking, talking. The other unintended consequence that it can have is that it can genuinely overwhelm the person where they don't really remember the key idea. You want to send them away with just a small bit of information rather than, saying so many things that there's no chance that they could remember that. Of course, you want to keep the answers not too long, but just long enough that there's some meaning there. So an example of an answer that might be way too short and not really even helpful is, let's say someone asks you, what is Islam? And you say, well, Islam means peace. That's a short answer. So you met that criteria, but it doesn't really tell them anything, right? It's true that the word Islam has the same root as the word salam, which means peace. And we believe that the word Islam means submission to God. So the relationship there is that by submitting, we attain peace. That's beautiful. That's wonderful. But it doesn't really tell the person a whole lot about the religion, right? Another short answer that doesn't really convey anything would be, oh, Islam is a lot like the other religions, like Christianity or Judaism. That's short, which is good, and it tells them a little something, but it's not really meaningful in any kind of way. A long answer, I mean, there's so many examples of that, so I'm not going to go into that. But what might be a reasonable answer, to give? And there's not one specific script that you need to memorize. but there's a couple of different ways that you can approach that. So obviously, Islam is a religion. Islam is a monotheistic religion. So Muslims believe that God is one, and Muslims believe that Muhammad is the last messenger. Muslims also believe in all the previous prophets that other religions believe in. Muslims believe in leading a moral life. About a quarter of the world's population are Muslims. And here in America, about 1% of Americans are Muslim. So there you have kind of an answer that gives, a couple of different pieces of information. And it's not just about the religion, but you tell them a little bit about Muslims as well, especially here in America, which is something they might be interested in. So it's not very long, but it's not too short either. It gives a bit of information which is meaningful, and then you can move on. They always can ask you a follow-up question. So if they feel like they want to know more, let them have the chance to do that rather than you deciding, all the detail that you think they might want. So tell them this little bit and then let them, if they want to know more, ask you a follow-up, and then you can answer the follow-up again with a short answer, and then you can go back and forth that way. So keep the answers accurate but precise. The next one is that think of this as an exchange of ideas, not a competition. It's not about winning, and it's also not about trying to get the other person's approval. And this one is probably one of the biggest ones that that can really help you have more productive conversations about Islam. What we want to remember when we are secure in our own faith, when we are unapologetically Muslim, the way that shows up when we talk to other people is that we don't need the other person to agree with us. We don't need the other person to give us their approval for us to be Muslim. When we get asked a question, we are responding in order to help educate the other person, not in order to receive their blessing or their agreement or anything like that. So see it as an exchange of ideas, and I'll give you some examples of that in a moment. The other thing that you want to remember is that when the person makes a claim that's not true, instead of getting upset or accusing that person of being wrong, you want to poke holes instead. So what do I mean by poking holes? What I mean is you want to ask questions and get them to think. Again, this goes along with the idea of you don't have to prove that they're wrong. You just get them to think about what they're saying. So what are some examples of that? You could say, is that really true? Or how do you know that to be true? Or is that a reliable source? Or have you checked other sources? Is there another way of looking at this? Another one could be, is that related to the topic? So if someone starts making claims that are, you started off talking about women in Islam, for example, and then they go off and start talking about the prayers or Hajj or this or that, or a story they read about a Muslim in this place or that place, you can bring it back to the topic and say, hey, but is that really related to what we're talking about? Don't feel like you are playing a whack-a-mole game where you have to just quickly, respond to every scattered thing that the other person is saying. Bring it back to what the original topic was, and be okay with certain things going unanswered if they're unrelated to what you initially were talking about. So is that related to the topic? Another one is something that comes up a lot, where people will make a claim about Muslims based on what they understand about Islam, and also vice versa. And so what you want to say, and this is something you might want to just remember, jot down, is that there's a difference between what Islam says and what some Muslims do. So we have to keep those separate. So there's no need for you, when someone is trying to make a correlation and say, well, because these Muslims did such and such, that must mean that your religion is such and such. You don't need to spend any time trying to justify that, defend that, explain that. You simply separate it as being two separate topics and say, what Islam says and what some Muslims do, those are kind of two separate things. So we have to keep them, we have to keep a distinction between them. Okay, so again, when you get stuck, when someone's making a claim that isn't true, remember, and I think out of everything I'm going to share with you, this and the next part are probably the most key. So I really want you to pay attention. Instead of getting defensive or awkward or trying to make counterclaims, when someone says something that triggers you, press the pause button. And instead of reacting by going on offense, simply poke holes. If all you can do is get them to question what they're saying, that's a huge achievement in that conversation. Even if you can't prove or disprove, what they're saying with other facts, that's okay. If all you can do is get them to think a little bit about what they're saying, that's a major accomplishment. So again, some things you can use. Is that really true? How do you know that to be true? Is that a reliable source? Have you checked other sources? Is there another way of looking at this? Is that related to the topic? So these are all things that you can use regardless of your level of knowledge. And that's what really is so beneficial here, is that this doesn't rely on you having a certain level of knowledge before you can even enter into a conversation. If someone makes claims that, even if you're not, you don't have the knowledge or the data to counteract what they're trying to claim, you can always poke holes in the argument by asking questions and getting them to think about what they're saying. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is, how can you gracefully exit a conversation? So the person has, you've asked them some questions about what they've said, and you've kind of gotten to the point where the ball is in your court, and now it's your turn to say something, to react and respond in some way. The line that I want you to remember to use in these situations is this: I don't have a specific answer to your question, but here's what I can tell you. And then I'm going to give you a series of about 6 or 7 statements that you can use. So again, I don't have a specific answer to your question, but here's what I can tell you. Again, remember, the goal in this training today is to equip any Muslim to have any basic informal conversation with a person from another background. So this training doesn't require you, as you can see, to attain a certain level of knowledge about Islam before you can talk to other people. And I'm also not suggesting that you make things up. So what I'm doing instead is I'm giving you some general phrases that you can use in any situation. So now when you say that I don't have a specific answer to your question, but here's what I can tell you, what you're doing is you're going to redirect now. And so what you're going to tell them is something that is a general answer to the area that they're talking about. So for example, if the criticism is about something that Muslims did, okay, what you could say is that I don't have a specific answer to your question, but what I can tell you is that I believe Islam is perfect, but Muslims are not. That's it. That's all you need to say. Let's say that they are giving you some examples about, violent acts that some Muslims have done. And they're trying to make the claim that because some Muslims have committed these violent acts, that there's a problem, with Islam or with Muslims in general. So what would you say in that case? You may not have any data that you can point to, but you can always say something like this: I don't have a specific answer to your question, but here's what I can tell you. Violence, I want you to pay attention to this. Violence is a human problem. It's not unique to Muslims. And that's true, right? I mean, every culture, every civilization throughout time has had elements of violence, violent people within it. So that is in no way an indication of the entire religion or the entire group. So it's just a completely baseless claim to make. Now, by starting with the idea that violence is a human problem, what you're saying is that I don't reject that violence exists. What I'm simply saying is that it's something every culture deals with. So you're agreeing with one part of it, but then you're pushing back on another aspect of it, which is a lot more productive than simply just sort of going up against a wall, going up against a brick wall, and just completely rejecting what the other person is saying. Another area that you could get a question about is, how Islam, how certain Muslims in certain countries treat women, or specific examples of that, of misogyny. And what you could say to that is, I don't have a specific answer to your question, but what I can tell you is that misogyny is a human problem. It's not unique to Muslims. And we all know that's true. I mean, even in this country, there's a lot of issues with that. So it's not particular to one culture, and that's something we completely reject because that's not what our faith teaches. But if someone were to say that, is it possible that some Muslims do that? Yes, of course it is. Just like it's possible for people of any background to do that. Another one related to women could be something along the lines of, again, I don't have a specific answer to your question, but what I can tell you is that Islam teaches us that women should be treated with dignity and respect. So again, if there's a claim, for example, that, well, your prophet, said this about women, or there's this verse in the Quran about women, how do you respond to that? You may not know the answer. You may not know the actual explanation to that particular hadith or that particular verse, and that's okay. You can always come back to what you do know. A general statement like, Islam teaches us that women should be treated with dignity and respect. Another one related to the violence question could be something like, Islam is a peaceful religion that rejects killing innocent people. So again, if that would be helpful in a case where the person is specifically quoting a verse where they're criticizing not Muslims, but the religion itself for promoting violence. You can say, I don't know the specific, issue that you're talking about, but here's what I do know. Islam is a peaceful religion and it rejects killing innocent people. Anytime there is a verse about anything, if you don't remember all of those examples I just mentioned to you, you can remember just one line. I don't have a specific answer to your question, but what I can tell you is there's a methodology for interpreting the Quran. So we don't take verses out of context. So this one you can use anytime someone talks to you about something that the Quran has in it somewhere, which maybe you haven't studied. Maybe you don't even know that that is in there, or maybe you know it's in there, but you don't have a coherent answer. Instead of trying to make up an answer, because we never want to give inaccurate information, stick with what you do know. Go ahead and admit that you don't have a specific answer to that specific question, but also at the same time, it doesn't mean you can't say anything. Share what you do know, which is that, there is a methodology for interpreting our scripture, and it's not just a matter of taking verses and just literally interpreting everything and taking things out of context. That much I know for sure. If it's a question about God, and, let's say the person is an atheist and they're questioning you about, well, if God is so good, then why is there all this evil and suffering? How can you believe in a God when the world is such a terrible place? Rather than get into a debate about whether or not the world is a terrible place, or instead of getting to a very lengthy philosophical debate that you may not be prepared for, you can simply say, I don't have a specific answer to your question, but what I can tell you is that we believe God is the most merciful, and he is the most just, and he is the most wise. So everything he does has a wisdom behind it, even when we don't understand it. And here you can insert any name for Allah that is relevant. So if it's something to do with wisdom, or why do things happen, which is usually what the question is, you can say that he is the most wise. Now in this, I would just point out that make sure you use the English name and not the Arabic name, because that's not going to obviously benefit that person at all. So again, most merciful, most just, most wise, any of those names you can use to push back on this notion that well, why would God allow this, or why would he allow that? Instead of speculating or making up things about Allah that you may or may not know, or instead of trying to get into a rational argument, which you may not be prepared to do, simply tell them a general statement that of what you know about Allah. Another thing that you can do besides the I don't have a specific answer to your question, but here's what I do know is if the person is not asking you a question, so those work if the person's asking you a question and you don't know the answer, that's what you can do. You can use a general statement instead. But if the person is not asking a question, but they're making a claim and they're kind of sticking with their claim, like, obviously it's true that Islam is fill in the blank, or obviously it's true that Muslims are all fill in the blank. What can you say to that? So what a lot of us do in that situation is we know what the person is saying is wrong, but we get so flustered and we feel like we are backed into a corner. And so we just start giving one thing after another, and we just sort of start rambling, and it's not really helpful, right? Rather than get tangled up in trying to explain something that you're not really prepared in that moment to do, you can simply say something like, it looks like we have different perspectives on this. Actually, as Muslims, we don't see it that way. Or you could say, it sounds like what you're saying is this. Is that right? Okay, well, here's what I believe about this. So you're not trying to say this is right or this is wrong. You're just simply identifying, acknowledging is the better word. You're acknowledging their viewpoint, and then you're stating yours. And you're saying, I guess we can agree to disagree. And that's a perfectly, perfectly valid way to end a conversation. So again, looks like we have different perspectives on this. Actually, as Muslims, we don't see it that way. I guess we can agree to disagree, right? In all of these cases, you're simply validating that there's a difference without acknowledging that they're right or you're wrong or whatever, vice versa. You're not doing that. You don't need to do that. You're just simply keeping the door open for a conversation. That's it. And then, so now you're getting to the ending of the conversation, right? So let's say, you ended with, hey, I guess we can agree to disagree, or looks like we have different perspectives on this. Whatever it is, however it is that you choose to end, or one of the earlier ones that I shared, which was, I don't have a specific answer to your question, but here's what I can tell you. And then one of those lines that I shared. So now, once you say that, you don't want to just abruptly walk away, right? Just like the beginning was important, and I talked about thanking the person for the question, as a way of nicely coming into the conversation, you also want to do the same thing at the end, so that the person remembers, how you presented yourself during this conversation with them. So some examples of closings that you could use. Hey, thanks again. I hope I was able to answer your question. Or it was great talking to you. Or I enjoyed our conversation. Thanks again for your question. You might say, well, this is such a small thing. Does it really matter that I, thank them for the question again, or that I, say something at the end? And the answer is it matters a lot, because what the person is judging here is they're not judging necessarily your knowledge of Islam. They're judging how you feel about Islam. And when you show up in a confident way, which shows with the way that you open and close the conversation, of course, how you handle the entirety of it, but the fact that you confidently open and you confidently close, and you're gracious in thanking them, for even asking the question, giving you the opportunity. All of this shows that you're someone that loves your faith and you're happy to talk about it. Right? You're confident of who you are. You're no encyclopedia, right? You're not a scholar, and they know that. No one's expecting you to know every last detail about anything, even though you might feel that way yourself, but that's not what the other person is expecting. And even if it does seem like they're a little bit demanding and they want answers to everything, it's not your job to be an expert. It's not. what we do want to always be able to do is just open the door to a conversation. That's all. I do believe that every Muslim, we want to try to get to that point where we never shy away when someone wants to strike up a conversation with us about our faith. We feel comfortable to where we can engage with other people. And so that's why I shared these scripts with you and these strategies with you, so that you feel, and I hope you can see that now, that even with whatever level of knowledge you have, it is possible for you to have a fruitful and friendly conversation with your fellow Americans, um, without making things up, without feeling like you're backed against a wall, without making it a win-lose proposition where somebody has to win and somebody has to lose, without making it also about, oh, I really have to like convert this person or whatever. That's not what it is. You're simply having a conversation. You're simply opening a door. And these simple strategies can help you do that in a way where hopefully next time you don't feel hesitant and awkward and defensive when you are in those situations. And what I hope you, obviously you want to always remain on a path of seeking knowledge. So I hope that as you see yourself having these conversations more and more, I hope that one of the things that it prompts you to do is to say, you know what? I'm so glad that I have the tools to have any conversation, even with the small bit of knowledge that I have. But now I actually want to go to the next level and I want to learn more. I want to be able to understand, the concept of women in Islam better, or why are these verses in there? I really want to study that. I really want to understand. Or what is the methodology for interpreting the Quran? I know that it's not just a matter of, taking verses out of context. I know there's more to it than that, but what is it? I want to understand those sciences that allow our scholars to interpret what Allah intended. So I hope that it encourages you to do that, because seeking knowledge is a lifelong pursuit. We are lifelong learners, not just in our professional lives or in our personal lives, but in our spiritual lives as well. It's something that's really, really important. So what I want to do now is I want to just do a quick recap of the entirety of what we've covered so far. This, again, was part 3 of the 4-part series, where I've been talking about how to be unapologetically Muslim and live your best life, based on my 5 C's of personal growth for Muslims. So we've talked about today a bunch of strategies for how to communicate effectively about Islam with people who are not Muslim. Previously, we talked about inner growth. So we talked about how do you strengthen your connection with Allah. And this, again, is for the benefit of those who haven't joined the other sessions, so you kind of know where today's topic fits within, this overall framework. Connecting with Allah and mastering our emotions, getting some insight and awareness into how our minds work and how our emotions work. These are things that can help you develop the resilience on the inside. And that's why the 5 C's begin with those 2 things, because those 2 things provide an anchor for you. The 3rd C is commit to your growth, which is not something we covered in this series because it goes in quite a bit of depth. But if you are a sister who's listening to this and you want to work with me and go deeper, I actually do have a program coming up very soon where I work with you on this. You can go to my website, aisha.arshad.com, to learn more about that. And again, that's for sisters only. But, the first whole part of this program is all about your inner growth, because that's the starting point. That's where it all begins. But then that alone is not enough, right? If we're going to live as active and engaged citizens in this country, if we're going to take a seat at the table, if we're going to be involved, then we have to have some basic skills in how to talk to our fellow Americans about our faith. So that's what we covered today. Now what I want to do is preview for you a little bit about what we're going to talk about next time. And that is how to communicate effectively with your fellow Muslims. Now, you might say, well, I don't really need help with that. I just need help talking to people who are not Muslim. But the truth is, if you really think about it, some of the most sticky and difficult conversations that we have are actually with our fellow Muslims. So people who might be on a different point in their journey with Islam, people who have, who have kind of follow a different interpretation of certain things than you do. It could be people who are having some doubts. So how do you deal with that, right? How do you answer their questions in a way that brings them closer to the faith and not in a way that pushes them away? You could also have Muslims who are struggling with other challenges in their life. So they're not having doubts about Islam, but they're struggling in some other area. And that is indirectly affecting their well-being spiritually. And so again, what is the right type of approach to use in those situations where we can, provide some support to that person to our capacity, and also make sure that whatever we tell them about Islam and things that they can do Islamically are, again, things that are helpful and not hurtful. So that's what we're going to focus on next time, inshallah. I also want to mention that in the last two sessions, I gave you a reflection exercise to do. So in week one, and if you don't get a chance to watch the entire recording for weeks 1 and 2, I would highly suggest go back and watch the last few minutes so that you can do these exercises. Week 1 exercise was a visualization exercise, and that starts at about the 38-minute mark, if I remember correctly. And last week's is again 5 or so minutes before the end, is where I gave you another reflection exercise to do as well. So I'm not going to repeat the exercises now, but if you have done them, or if you do decide to go back and do them, I would be happy to give you some feedback if you want to send it to me. So you can email me at Aisha@Arshad.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram as well as LinkedIn, so you can find me there. For the sisters, I don't mind if you want to contact me directly. Sister Munira and Sister Nishat, they both have my contact information, and you're more than welcome to send me that. And I'd love to give you some feedback on your goal and your visualization that you did in those 2 weeks. So I hope that you've been enjoying what we've been covering so far. I hope that this is motivating you to really try to become the best version of yourself. That's really what this is all about. And when we say the best version of yourself, we mean in every area of your life. Because for me, my ultimate goal in all of the work that I do is to help Muslims shine. And what I mean by that is to help Muslims be successful in deen and dunya. And the inspiration for this, well, one of the inspirations for this is the dua in Surah Baqarah, ayah number 201, where we say, Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanatan wa fil akhirati hasanatan wa qina adhaban nar. So, oh Allah, grant us good in this life, grant us good in the hereafter, and save us from the penalty of the fire. We're not asking, oh Allah, make me miserable in this life so that I can be happy in the next. That's not what we're saying, right? But we often have this unconscious belief that if we're good people, we can't be happy in this life. We can't have any successes right now. We have to suffer and be miserable. That's the only way to please Allah and end up in Jannah. But that's not what Allah teaches us, right? Allah teaches us to ask for good in this life and in the next. So that's my focus, is to help Muslims, particularly Muslims in America, to find a path, a way that is rooted in the teachings of our own faith, that also draws on the modern teachings of positive psychology and personal growth, in a way that helps American Muslims shine in every aspect of their life without compromising their deen. That's very important. and without burning out and getting stressed and overwhelmed. Because there's a lot of folks out there that are, mashallah, managing to balance, managing to be successful, in lots of different ways. But then the price they pay for that is that they're burning out. And that to me is not sustainable, it's not healthy, and it's not what we want, right? I believe that when we follow certain principles, again, principles that are rooted in our faith as well as personal growth strategies, that there is a way where we can gracefully balance the different areas of our life, whether that's our faith, our work, or our personal life. All of these things can be balanced in a beautiful, harmonious way where we are confident, not just on the outside, not just when we're talking to people, but even on the inside. What I mean by that is our conviction in Islam, our yaqeen is so strong that we're unshakable on the inside. One dua that I really love that I recite often to help me with this, and I love to share that with you too, is Ya muqallib al-qulub thabbit qalbi ala dinik. O turner of hearts, keep my heart firm on your religion. This is something that we want to always, always be asking Allah, because doesn't matter what state you're in right now. If you're lucky, if you're blessed, Allah has guided you, and obviously, if you're listening to this talk, you have that iman in your heart. You have that desire to be, the best Muslim you can. But there's no guarantee about tomorrow. So we always have to ask Allah not only to guide us, but to keep us firm on the guidance. That's really, really important. And so my goal is to help Muslims keep that conviction, keep that confidence from the inside out. And that's what I teach. So I hope that this has been beneficial to you. I do hope that you'll go back and do the exercises both from weeks 1 and as well as week 2. If you have any questions or if you would like any feedback on your exercises, again, you can email me at Aisha@aisha8arshad.com. You can also check out my website, Aisha8arshad.com. And you can find me on Instagram at Aisha_Arshad, as well as Facebook and LinkedIn. So please do send me your responses. I'd love to read them. I'd love to give you some feedback so that you can use that, practically speaking, in your life to start living your best life. That's what I want for every Muslim. I do believe it's possible. Is it something that doesn't require any sacrifice? No. Obviously, it takes some work, but as Muslims, we believe what? We believe that we tie our camel and we place our trust in Allah, right? So we do our part and we trust in Him. And the 5 C's is really about both of these. I would say the first one is focused on placing our trust in Allah, because it begins with that. And then the rest of the 5 C's are all about tying the camel. What are the things, the practical things that we can do in our lives to help us show up confidently as a Muslim? Our fellow Muslims, whether that's our kids or our siblings or our friends or new Muslims, people that have just entered into the faith, we can be an inspiration for all of these people, right? Once we develop that yaqeen, that conviction, and once we are taking care of our own needs emotionally and physically and all of the other needs that we have, once we're doing that, then we can be of benefit to other people. And ultimately, that's what we're aiming for, is that we want to be one of those people that is not only healthy and resilient in our own lives, but that is able to make a contribution to other people, meaning that we are in a position now where we can share our gifts with the rest of the world. And that's the 5th C, which is contribute. The ultimate aim of all the things that I teach is to get you to a place where you feel that you have something to give, and where you feel like you can do it in a balanced way, where your needs are also getting met, but you're also able to shine your light in a way that serves other people. you want to be active in your masjid. That's so important, right? You want to carve out some time to be an active member of your own community, but also beyond that as well. So there's ways that we can volunteer and get involved in the broader American society that we live in. That's important too. And that's why I teach these skills in communicating, because once you start to put yourself out there, you're going to need these skills, right? You're going to need to have those strategies for how do you have these conversations with your fellow Americans once you start volunteering, or you take on a bigger role at work, so you're stepping up there. You need to be comfortable and confident in your own skin when you're talking about Islam. So thank you so much for joining me. If you've been here for all three parts, that's wonderful. If this is your first one, I hope you got a lot out of it. And again, be sure to join me next week at the same time for the fourth and final session. With that, I'll close. Subhanaka wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.